Daniel Sheridan. He's from the Children's Bereavement Center, and let me tell you a little bit about who's here today. So here we have some psychology trainees and we have 2 audiology trainees. Usually our group is much larger, but as you just heard, some of them are in clinic or they're on consultation calls, so it's kind of hard to get everybody together. But we try to do these meetings once a month. And, but this is our one chance to get together once a month and really see each other's faces. I know I only get to see Drew around this time too, so we usually have different topics centered around leadership and advocacy, but we really wanted to hear what you had to say in light of everything that's been happening and all the tragedies that unfortunately have been occurring, especially this time. So we're really happy to have you here, and you can introduce yourself.
Thank you all for having me. So my name is Daniel Sheridan. I work for the Children's Bereavement Center. Have any of you heard of the Children's Bereavement Center? No? Okay. That's good, because I'll tell you all about it. I'm the Chief Program Officer there, so I'm responsible for training and education. I oversee all of our support groups, and I also do research and evaluation. I graduated from UM and the Coral Gables campus in counseling psychology. I got my PhD. And I started this job in December, so I'm pretty new here. So today's is just a pretty brief discussion. It's about how to talk to a child or a family about a death of someone. I also included some things that have to do more with children with intellectual disabilities, and how you can help them and talk to them about it, because there's some slight differences that you want to keep in mind. And it's also, we'll talk about the CBC and what we do and how we're a community resource for referrals for you all. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. I like conversation. I think it makes it more fun and enjoyable. So let's get started. Any questions before we start? Okay. So I may have to look this way sometimes just to read where I'm at. So, put this up. So why do we do what we do? So we call ourselves the CBC for short. So if you look at statistics, you'll find that 1 in 5 school-age children will experience a loss in their life. If you take that further, out of one of those 5, 1 in 4 will suffer the loss of a parent. For college students, the number goes to 1 in 3. They deal with the death of some sort, someone close or someone they love. So we feel that this population, children, adolescents, college students, are a disenfranchised population. People don't know to talk to a child about death. They don't think children really go through it. It's more of an elderly issue and an adult problem. And children, it's not something children have to worry about. But it actually is. And there's specific things you need to keep in mind when talking to a child about death. And they're not getting the help that they need. So we feel that we offer that, we provide a space, an education, and a support system to help children go through a grieving experience. So, let's talk about the word dead. What comes to mind when you hear the word dead? Do you have any thoughts or emotional reactions to it?
Sadness.
Sadness, sure. Permanent.
Change.
Mm-hmm. How is it different from, let's say the word passed away?
Seems like I use the word pass away a lot of times with in personal conversation because it seems softer.
There we go. Yes, it's softer. We all say passed away. Yeah. Nobody likes to say the word dead. It's uncomfortable. It's in your face. It's real. So we always cushion the word. We use euphemisms. We say passed away. They're no longer here anymore. Whatever. It's understandable because it's uncomfortable. So what happens, let's take that further and let's say we're talking to a child. What would happen if we say, we lost mommy last night?
Where is she?
Exactly. Is this hide and go seek? Are we going to go find her? Where is she? What if we said, Daddy fell asleep last night and did not wake up?
Oh, he'll wake up later.
He'll wake up later, yeah.
Or the child might get scared to go
to
sleep.
Exactly. If I fall asleep, am I not going to wake up? So when we talk with children, and this is especially true for children with intellectual disabilities, we have to be very clear, very, very clear about what happens. We have to use simple language that they can understand and that they can just grasp. And the clearest phrase is the word dead, died. Mommy died last night, daddy died yesterday. It gets the point across. It's uncomfortable and it's not pretty, it's sad, but we can grasp it. We have a conversation. When we start using different words, the meanings change, things get misinterpreted, and we're not on the same page. So we have to start getting comfortable using the word dead or died when we talk with children. So when you talk with a child, there's 4 concepts you want to try to communicate about death when beginning to have this conversation. The first is that death is irreversible. So on TV and cartoons, you always see a cartoon character get smashed by an anvil and then they magically pop back up and they're all great. That's not how real life works, as we know. But children have a very confusing idea of death from that perspective. So they think if somebody dies, they'll just come back to life. That's not true. So we have to begin to help the child understand that when somebody dies, it's irreversible. They're not coming back to life. And that's an essential first step because it helps the child begin to mourn. We all have to mourn, we all have to grieve, even children. And that's sad and it's unfair, but it's a fact of life. So if we can start to communicate that this happened and they're not coming back to life, we can begin to grieve and we can have a conversation around that. Also is that all life functions end completely at the time of death. So children have an idea that all things are alive, a doll's alive, G.I. Joe's alive, it's not breathing, it's not blinking, but it's alive in some way. Humans don't work that way. When somebody dies, their heart stops beating, they don't smile, they don't blink, they don't breathe. Very simply, the body stops working. And that's a very nice way you can explain to a young child that the body stops working when someone dies. And this is helpful because it can help the child understand that a person's not suffered if they've been sick a long time. Third is that everything that is alive eventually dies. All things die that are living. And this is important because children can often take attribution to that they're the cause of something. That has nothing to do with them. It happens in divorce, it happens in death. Mom did not die last night because I didn't do my homework or I got a bad grade. All things die, and this is just what happens. So it helps shift perspective so they don't feel like they did something. It's just what happens. Now when you talk with children, they can start to get scared that if all things die, am I going to die? That's a fear that can develop. So one way to work around that is you can say to them, yes, all things die, but this is often something that happens when people are very old. This is not something you have to worry about for a long, long time. You're safe, you're okay, providing them comfort in life that, tragedy happens, weird things happen, but on the whole, is something the child does not have to worry about dying for a very long time.
Can I
Yes.
just ask a question?
Sure.
When you see kids that are that scared of death, at what point would you refer them to, let's say, something more than just having a talk with them?
Yeah, if it becomes, like a debilitating fear, it turns into anxiety. It might have nightmares. There might be some OCD components into that. If it's just interfering with school, just daily functioning, that seems beyond just how a conversation may play out, or what looks outside the realm of a grieving process, then we have to start thinking about maybe a specialist or having somebody else to talk to about that. But in the early stages with death and grieving, it gets very confusing because even with adults, you don't know if it's depression or it's grief. They look exactly the same in the beginning. So you need some time to just figure out what's the lay of the land, because of course it's sad. Of course people are going to look like they're depressed. They've gone through a death, a loss. But over time, if it feels like the person's not getting better, things may be getting worse, especially with children, there may be bedwetting, regressive behaviors, then we got to start looking at something's not going right, and we need to have a specialist involved.
And the bereavement period now in the DSM is really short.
Yes, they completely changed the criteria for bereavement. So I get it confused. They removed the bereavement exclusion or something to that nature, where they can, if they could be diagnosed with depression now,
Right.
even though it's just grief.
Right, because they like really shorten the time period
Mhm.
that you're like allowed to
Yes.
grieve now,
Mhm.
which is crazy.
Yeah, they sort of pathologized grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops, what's this? Lastly, there's always a physical reason somebody dies. There's a physical cause, and this goes back to the idea of guilt or blame. That it's not something that you did. The person was sick. Their heart stopped beating. There's a physical cause of death. It's not something that they did or something magical that happened to them. Oops, I didn't fix that. So how do you check in to make sure a child understands? So there's 4 steps, I believe. First, you want to ask a child what they understand about death. That's always a good baseline. If somebody has, you don't know how to talk to a child about death, you say, what do you know about death? See what they understand, where they're at. Some people might know a lot. Some people might not know anything. So it gives you a baseline of how to talk and where to begin. Second, you always want to give simple and developmentally appropriate explanations. You don't need to use medical jargon. You don't need to overburden them with unnecessary information. You always want to assess where are they at developmentally, and what do they need to know? What is the essential information they need to know based on where they're at? And you go from there. You always want to ask them to explain back what you said to them and how they understood it. Because you may say something and they may understand it completely different. And if you don't check in, you're not on the same page. You're not communicating with each other. The child has a different idea, you have a different idea, and we're not on the same page. So always check in and say, explain to me what you heard me say. And if there's any misunderstandings, you'd like to just correct them, and until you're both on the same page with each other. So children have familiarity with loss. If you look at any Disney movie, there's going to be more or less someone's going to die, and it's usually a parent. And Disney's very clever about that. So children have some foundation for understanding what death means, and if you don't have anywhere to begin, you can always use a Disney movie, just as a framework for understanding what's your child's favorite Disney movie. Probably the parent or someone died in that movie, and you can use that as a framework for beginning to have that conversation. So this is more now along the lines of children with intellectual disabilities and what may manifest in a reaction to grief. So emotionally, emotional expressions can vary greatly. So people with autism spectrum disorder may express an emotion opposite of what is expected. So if everybody's crying, they may start laughing because they don't know how to identify their emotion. There's confusion, so they may be happy. They may start laughing. It doesn't mean that they're happy. So you always just want to be aware of what's going on and try to check in, and don't get confused by what you see. So some emotional reactions that you may see is there can be anger, aggressive or demanding behaviors. They may be anxious, frequent crying, withdrawal and unresponsiveness, or unconcern or a sense of calmness. Cognitively, the person may question if he or she is the cause of death, which can create feelings of guilt. So as I mentioned, so you always want to look if they're blaming themselves or they feel like they did something for that. Cognitively, through a grieving experience, children may have difficulty processing information. There may be confusion. You might see increased executive functioning problems, such as organizing, remembering things, or paying attention. You may feel a loss of control in life. You may feel preoccupied with the person who has died, and a fear that other people in their lives will also die. Behaviorally, people with intellectual delays may exhibit delays in their behavioral responses to grief. So if a death happened, let's say today, for example, you might not see reactions to grief until a month from now. It's somewhat different for people with intellectual delays and children with intellectual delays. The grieving process can start way later than what everyone else went through. So things might seem fine, and then all of a sudden you're going to see this decrease, and that's when the grieving starts. So that's very different than you'll see with other children. Behaviorally, they may start to act out or break things. There may be increases in repetitive or self-stimulatory behaviors. They may be more irritable. They may want to withdraw and isolate. And there may be some regression or loss of skills. Any questions on those things? No. So how do you help a child through a grieving experience? First, you want to be honest, you want to include them, and you want to involve them. So when dealing with a child with intellectual disability or delays, you always want to offer them the choice of whether to attend the funeral or memorial service. You don't, at the end of the day, a person's a person. They feel, they hurt, they grieve, they may have difficulties, they may not understand things as clearly, it might take them a little bit longer, but they're human, they feel. So you always, protecting a child with an intellectual disability from grieving is not helping them in the long run. You want to, because they've lost somebody too. So you want to involve them in some capacity. You want to think about them in a particular way that might be different, but always remember that they've lost somebody too. So how can you help a child grieve in that way? So you can help them, ask them, do you want to participate in this? Rather than say, oh, they can't handle it, they have enough going on. Offer them an opportunity to see what they want to do with that. If they can't choose because of cognitive limitations, involve them as fully as possible in the rituals that are being arranged. You want to listen. So being available to listen and providing support is essential immediately after the death and weeks and months following, because grief may be more delayed for these children. The understanding of the permanence of death develops more slowly because of the delayed grief reaction. So the concept that the person's not coming back, that they're gone forever, may take a longer time for them to understand and require further conversations over time and a revisiting of the experience. You want to seek out nonverbal rituals. So not everybody is particularly skilled or able to express themselves in a written way or a verbal way. So what are some nonverbal ways that a person can grieve or express themselves through a ritual to memorialize the person? You want to think about photos and mementos. So one way to see if a person has going through grieving is that photographs or locations where the person, they have happy memories, there's a lack of, they're not avoiding them as much. If they can begin to go to their favorite restaurant that they had or look at pictures of them on Facebook, they're working through the grieving process. It's not as fresh or as new. People with intellectual disabilities should be helped choosing photos or mementos. So you want to ask them, do you want to keep this? Is this something you want to have in the future? They may say yes, they may say no. If they say no, hold on to it and ask them a couple months later down the line. They may change their mind or they may feel the same. But give them an opportunity to keep things, to have things that they can remember their loved one by. You can create a scrapbook, some physical, tangible things that they can have to remember the person. For people with intellectual disabilities, you want to minimize change as much as possible. You don't want to change the routine if you don't have to. You don't want to change accommodations or caregivers. If there's a major change that needs to be implemented, a guideline is to wait a year, if possible, after the death. If you can. If not, then we have to work around that. But try not to create more change or more stress than that's already been put on the person. You want to avoid assessment. So after a grieving death or grief experience, you don't want to take them to get assessed for things to make you see how they're doing, for testing, because you're not going to get an accurate assessment. They're going to be caught up in a grieving experience and you're not going to see what you need to see. So if there's an assessment or testing that needs to be scheduled, reschedule it for a later period after the child or young adult has worked through more of their emotions. You want to support observance of anniversaries. So the birthday of the person that died, the anniversary that the person died, help to acknowledge it. It could be through a birthday party, it could just visiting the person at their grave at the cemetery. Help to create a conversation and talk about it with them and see what they want to do. But always acknowledge it and acknowledge the anniversary. And lastly, you want to seek a specialist for consultation if needed. So, if, like we said earlier, the person's not getting better, a lot of time has passed by, they may be getting worse, the grieving process is not going in a normative direction, you want to check in and help the child or young adult see a specialist and get that worked through. There may be aggressive behavior, mutism, loss of skills, or self-injury. I also saw there's visual narratives for grief online. So if people they need like additional help understanding the death, there's visual narratives that you can help the child and show them about what happens when somebody dies. And this is one example, which is pretty nice. But there's also ways that you can, really explain to the child what's going to happen, prepare them for the event. If there's a funeral, walk them through exactly what's going to happen so they're prepared and they're ready. That people are going to be crying. We're going to go to the church or whatever. You're going to see a coffin. It's going to be a box, and whoever is going to be inside of it. And there's going to be prayers, and help them prepare for what's going to happen. So what do you say to somebody, a child or to anybody that died? So who is suffering from a loss of somebody? So we always want to be helpful, and we always try to be nice, but we say things that are unintentionally unhelpful. And there's better, more helpful ways that you can say it. So you often hear people say, I know what you're going through. You do not know what the person's going through. There is no way you know what the person's going through. You may have an idea, you may have both lost a grandma, but you have no idea how the person's feeling. You don't know the relationship they had, you don't know their history. You make assumptions when you say, I know what you're going through, and you lose the person, they feel like they're not being heard. So it's much more helpful to ask a question. So you could say, can you tell me more about what this has been like for you? How are you? Then you really have a conversation. You're interested, you want to know about them. People also say something like, you must be incredibly angry, or you must be incredibly sad. Okay, that's true, but someone might say, but I'm also relieved. The person's been sick forever. They're no longer suffering. So yes, I'm angry, but I also feel relieved. People feel all sorts of things in a death experience. So when telling somebody what they're feeling is not really helpful. What's more helpful is you can say something like, most people have strong feelings when something like this happens to them. What has this been like for you? How are you feeling? People also say something like, this is hard, but it's important to remember the good things in life too. So focusing on the good stuff is nice. You want to try to make the person feel better because they're sad, but they're not in the mood to feel happy right now. They're sad. If you can sit with them and talk with them about the sad part, about the loss, you're going to go much further and be more helpful to them because they have a lot to say. There's not many people who want to hear about the sad stuff. So if you could be that person and sit with them in the sad and be that person so they're not alone with all their sad feelings, you're going to go a lot further with them. You're going to make much more of an impact on their grieving process and helping them with them. So you could say something like, what kind of memories do you have about the person who died? Now you're having a real conversation. You're talking about stuff that may have happy components, but there's also sadness in it and missing and mourning. People also say things like, well, at least he's no longer in pain. Okay, well that's true, but he's dead and I miss him. So whenever you try to make the person feel better, you're missing the mark. If you find yourself saying, at least, blah, 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 try to bite your tongue because you're going in not a very helpful direction. So you can say something like, what types of things have you been thinking about since your loved one died? So I don't know if there's a pattern that you guys can pick up on, but in these questions, what's happening? What kind of questions are these versus the statements? Ah, very good. Okay, good. These are open-ended questions. Do you all know what open-ended questions are? Okay, good. So yeah, if you can just ask an open-ended question, you get so much information. There's a conversation that starts to develop versus just a statement at people. We also have to think about culture. All cultures grieve differently. So you want to ask somebody, how does your family and your culture recognize and cope with the death of a family member? And does this fit in with your preference at this time? So people may very much adhere to their cultural belief system about grieving, others may not. And you can also ask, can you help me understand how I can help you and your family at this time? Be curious, be interested about their cultural background, in their grieving process. But you also want to keep in mind that you want to be mindful of assumptions. So one Hispanic family may grieve one way, but another Hispanic family may grieve a different way. Just because they're Hispanic and there's shared cultural ways of grieving does not mean that all Hispanic people grieve the same way. So the best approach is to be aware that culture exists and there's differences, but make it individualized. Ask the person how their family celebrates or honors the death of somebody, and if that's what they want to do. But most of all, just be present and authentic and be curious, because culture plays a huge component. So we're going to switch gears and talk about the CBC. Are there any questions? I know this was brief introduction to this kind of stuff, but does anybody have any questions or things they feel unsure about? No? Okay. So we're going to talk about now the CBC and what we do and what we believe and why we do things. So the CBC believes that grief is a natural, healthy reaction to loss. There's no pathology in grieving. We all grieve. We're supposed to grieve. It's what people do. We also feel that each individual has a capacity to heal. Something terrible has happened to you. You've experienced the death of somebody. It's very sad, but you will get through this. You will make it out of this, and you will heal. We also believe that the intensity, duration, and expression of grief is unique for each individual. We all grieve, and we all grieve differently. We don't tell you how to grieve, the right way to grieve, the wrong way to grieve, because there is no right or wrong. We want to help you find out how you grieve and allow you to do that. Offer you a space where you can grieve in your own unique way. We also believe that relationships continue after the person has died. We never tell anybody that you should forget about the person, that they're gone and you have to move on. We want to try to help you remember that person in some way. Keep that person in your life, and it can be in all sorts of ways. It could be through prayer, if you pray. It could be through a memorial, rituals, conversations you have, whatever you like. But we want to help you maintain some sort of relationship, and we call that continuing bonds. That's in the literature. It's called continuing bonds. We also feel that grief is transformative and can lead to positive growth. So a post-traumatic growth perspective. That something bad has happened, but through this you will find out stuff about yourself that you never realized. You may realize talents that you have, skills you may have, a sense of resilience you didn't know exists inside of you. And you can reflect back and say, like, wow, I know a lot more about myself than I gave myself credit for, and I've grown a lot from this experience, even though it's been very sad and terrible. And lastly, we feel that children and adults benefit from the camaraderie of others who are also grieving. So grieving should never be something you do by yourself. Connection with other people, that social support is so critical to working through grief, that we need others in our lives, especially in times of grief. And that's why we offer support groups. We do group work rather than very individualized work. And we have a picture on the bottom that's a backpack full of rocks. And that's kind of how we view our model of what we do. So we say that when somebody dies that you love, you're given this backpack full of rocks. And it's heavy, and it's uncomfortable, and it's horrible. If you come to our groups, we offer you the space to take off your backpack and open it up and start looking at the rocks. Take the rocks out and begin to examine it, talk about it, explain it. And We give you the option of either tossing the rock away or putting it in your backpack for this week, and you come back next week and you can bring the rock out again. Over time, we believe that you'll eventually throw away those rocks, and your backpack's going to get a lot lighter. It's not going to be as heavy, it's not going to be as painful. You'll always have the backpack, but it won't be as burdensome upon you. So our groups are founded in what we call the helpful grieving model. And our model has certain factors. First is that our groups that we offer are consistent and open-ended. So all of our groups occur at the same place at the same location. We offer consistency in that regard. We run on a school calendar, so if school doesn't meet that day, the group doesn't meet that day. And we do not have a curriculum. We don't tell you what you're going to talk about tonight. We don't structure our groups. We want you to come in with what you're talking about, with what you want to talk about, what's most important to you, and that's going to be what we're going to talk about tonight. Our groups are also accessible, so they all occur within schools within the community, and most importantly is that they're free of cost. It's absolutely free to join. We even feed you. We provide pizza dinner for the family a half hour before the groups start. So we take dinner out of the equation, figuring out how we're going to feed the kids, get their homework done, and get them to groups that night. We want you to come. We want you to participate, so we will feed you and take that out of the equation. We're also inclusive. We include the whole family, and we strongly, strongly recommend the whole family comes. We feel that grief is not the child's problem, it is not the parent's problem, but it's a family problem that needs to be worked through. And if the child is going to their group at night and the adult's going to their group at night, they're both talking about their loss in their own developmentally appropriate ways. They have a language where they can begin to discuss it, and they can take what they learned in group and bring it home and begin to continue to have those conversations that are so necessary for the family. Our children and adult groups occur at the same time, so they split off and go to their own separate groups at night. We don't separate by loss. It doesn't matter if it was a homicide, a suicide, an illness, an accident. All losses are welcome. Nobody's excluded. It doesn't matter if the death occurred 5 days ago or 5 years ago. If you want to come, you're welcome. So it doesn't matter what time that happened. And you can stay as long as you like. We recommend you stay for a year. People come for 5 years. People come for a year, then stop coming for 2 years, and then come back again and stay for another year. It's cool with us. All we care about is helping, and we want you to come and participate. We're here for you if you need us. Lastly, all of our groups are developmentally focused, so they're appropriate. We have 5 categories. So we have younger elementary groups, older elementary, middle school, high school, and adult. So every age group has their own specific group. They're grounded in scientific theories of grief, and all of our facilitators are trained through the CBC, and at least there's 2 facilitators per group. One of them has a master's degree in mental health profession, a counseling profession. So they're trained in that regard as well. So what do our groups do? What are our impacts? So we believe that children and adults and families learn to develop coping strategies, how to cope with the loss. They build a sense of resilience and hope. The family unit becomes stronger because now they're talking. They went through something very sad and terrible, but they're talking with each other now. They become more cohesive. Everybody becomes empowered. They realize they have strengths that they didn't know that they had. They develop a sense of self-compassion for themselves, and they learn to maintain the relationship after the loss. They integrate the loss into their lives. So we have 5 family sites in South Florida, so we have a location in all 3 counties. In Miami-Dade, we have the most. We have 3. So we have one in Coconut Grove at Ransom Middle School. We have one in Miami Shores, and we have one in West Miami. In Broward, we have a location at Nova, Southeastern University, and in Palm Beach, we have one at Franklin Academy in Boynton Beach, Lake Worth. The 4 sites below are also, we're in partnership with Vitas Healthcare, which does palliative care and hospice care, so they help work with us as well. We also have an adult-only group. So this is for young adults or older adults who don't have a family, who don't have kids, but who have gone through a loss. and they want to come to a support group. So we have 4 locations, 2 in Coral Gables, 1 in Miami Beach, and 1 in Broward County at Nova, where the other site is. That's called Lift from Loss. In terms of scheduling, the groups run from 6:30 to 8:30. So from 6:30 to 7, we have a pizza dinner, which is free, as I said. And then from 7 to 8:30 is our support groups. From 8:30 to 9:30, all of our facilitators and volunteers stay for an extra hour and they go through supervision. So it's an opportunity to just sort of debrief, case management, make sure everybody's on the same page. Do people need follow-ups or referrals? Or people need more help than we can offer? There's also opportunities for continuing education, so continuous training. That's kind of what we try to tackle in that hour. In terms of rules, we don't have many, but we do have some that we feel are very important. So if you come to our groups as a participant, you are required to attend an orientation. And it's just an opportunity for us to tell you what we do, why we do it, what the rules are, the expectations of the group. So everybody goes through an orientation. All people who attend the group are actual participants. We do not allow guests into our group. So there's nobody who's just coming in to check it out and observe. If you're sitting in that circle of group, it's because you're here because you've gone through a loss and you want to participate in the group. So you're a participant. We do maintain group confidentiality. So what happens in the children's group stays in the children's group. What happens in the adult group stays in the adult group. If there are safety concerns that would require the breaking of confidentiality, we of course will do that, but we keep things confidential within the groups. We really stress the importance of attendance and timeliness. So we start on time, we end on time. We ask that you come each week and participate. And most importantly is we have something called the I pass rule. We want you there. That's our main goal, is to be in the group, but there's no pressure to speak, especially with children. We don't force children to speak or anybody to talk in the groups. If they just want to listen, that's absolutely fine. So particularly in children's group, we go around in the circle and everybody gets a turn to talk. If it comes to the one child and they don't want to talk, they can just say, I pass, and we move on. That's it. We don't pressure them at all. We know that they're listening, and when they feel safe, when they feel ready, when they want to, they'll talk. And that's cool with us. But all we want you to do is be there with other people who know what you're going through, who've been there with you, who've experienced a loss similar to yours, and you get that support from your peers. And that's the presentation. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Were there summer groups?
Groups do run in the summer. They run like every other week. So we don't run every week. We kind of take it a year-by-year basis to see what the need is, because people sometimes go away for the summer and things just dip off. So we take it case by case during the summer. But yeah, we do offer the full year to some extent.
Do you work with Miami-Dade County Public Schools, like their counselors? Because I think that this is such an amazing resource. I went through something as a teacher. Okay. So the counselor would pull the child, and I'm sure that they would talk about very similar things, but as you mentioned, it's a family issue, and if I would have known about something like this, I would have definitely referred the family.
Sure. Yeah, we try to keep in touch with all the public school systems, so I do a lot of the trainings. I do most of the trainings, so I've met already with the social workers and the school psychologists, so it's just difficult getting in touch with the people, like finding the right people to talk to. So that's the main challenge, but they know about us, so yeah.
I think it would be beneficial even for teachers to know about it, not just the school psychologist or the social worker, because
there's always such an issue.
You're working with that child every day, and it was hard for me to kind of even approach this child. He was in first grade, and he was the oldest one in his family. And I did what I thought was right. At the moment, my puppy had puppies, so I actually gave the family a puppy. They wanted one, and I had talked about it with the counselor, and I had 6 puppies, and the family was very happy with, it's something like that brought joy to them, and so I don't know if I did something right, but I thought that was after a while, it was after a few months, but But the family was very happy. They kept in touch with me after, and you know, it was that's how I knew how to cope. But I don't even think teachers know what to do in those situations. So even bringing something like this up for teachers as a professional development or something.
Totally, yeah.
I've run groups in different settings that are much more sort of like cognitive behavioral therapy based or dialectical behavioral therapy based. So there's like a set curriculum, and I was really interested to hear what are some of the, because there's not a set curriculum, what are some of like the general techniques you think about to like facilitate conversation or like evidence-based techniques to help kids cope through in a group setting? I would just be interested to hear sort of what that looks like. Yeah,
a lot of what we do, like in terms of theoretically, a lot of our stuff goes to attachment theory. So we try to provide like the secure attachment. So providing that consistency, that nurturing, just attending. That's why the timeliness is very important. We're here for you each week. There's also something called dual process model of grief. So the idea that sometimes people have good days, sometimes people have bad days, and they oscillate between them. That grief is not this linear process. For children, I forgot to mention this, we also incorporate music therapists and art therapists as well. So children is a lot of activity-based, expressive movement, and in that sort of realm. In terms of not having the curriculum, I think we focus more on like an interpersonal process. So like Irving Yalom, like group factors of change sort of thing. That people, there's this universality, understanding, people helping each other. Just this interpersonal learning that develops. So our group facilitators have more process-oriented training in terms of that, just in terms of asking open-ended questions and noticing themes and that sort of stuff.
That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Well, if anybody has questions, I'm going to send a PowerPoint. My contact information is on that. I know what internship here is like, it's crazy, but if you ever want to volunteer, you always accept volunteers, but no pressure. So thank you, and always feel free to reach out to me if you ever have questions or need a resource in the community.
And the volunteers that you take can be from any discipline. It could be a social worker, maybe a speech language pathologist.
Anybody, If you want to volunteer with us, everybody's welcome. You have to come to a training through the CBC. I'm responsible for the training. And if you do have a master's or higher, we do in some cases pay facilitators because we need master's level. Eventually we'll be opening up a site in Overtown next year if you're interested in more.
That's good to know.
Yes, especially, I forgot we're right next to Overtown.
That's one of our main communities that we work with.
So we're trying to, by the fall, the school year, we're going to try to open up a site there. So if you all happen to be in the community and you want to be involved, that's something we will be paying people to participate just because it's challenging. It's a whole different ballgame. So, But all are welcome to volunteer regardless of your background. So
would you be volunteering to be a facilitator in the group, or what kinds of?
You can volunteer in different capacities. Most of our volunteers are facilitators. So if you're not a master's level clinician, have that clinical background, you will be with somebody who does. So if that's something that you're concerned about, don't worry about that. You'll be trained by us in some group facilitation and theory and stuff like that. But supervision, opportunity to learn, you'll participate in the group. If that's something you don't want to do, there's opportunities to help at events. We do a 5K in the fall. We do an event in April, like a fundraising event. There's all sorts of ways to be involved if it's something you want to be, involved with in some capacity. So.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Spanish. Oh, that's something else I wanted to ask. How do you deal with like the Spanish-speaking families? If they have their own...
We do have Spanish-speaking groups. We do have Creole capacity also. In Miami Shores, there's Creole capacity for sure. But yeah, most if not all of our groups have Spanish capacity.
Okay.
So.
Awesome. And I'm also going to share with Family Navigator. So I think that's a great community partner for them to know about and send families there.
Perfect.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Daniel.
of course.
Thank you.
Welcome.